and they're very egotistical and very, also at the same time, though, very callous, or a lack of empathy on things that we would consider that most people would have empathy for. But the other thing that becomes tricky, and even, there's video I've seen of Dr. Robert Hare, who developed the PCLR, Psychopathy Checklist Revised, to help weed out and identify people, potential. If somebody gets to a certain amount of these indicators, it makes them, it's almost like if you've ever heard pre-qualified for a loan. Somebody has shows enough of these indicators, pre-qualified for diagnosis with antisocial personality disorder, that we would know as psychopathy or sociopathy. So it can be very tricky to try to identify this.
Okay, now, would you say that if somebody has psychopathy, they're necessarily going to do harm to the people around them or to others? Or are there people who have psychopathy who may just be irrelevant or even do good with that psychopathy? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
There's such a wide range of people who have this, and they are like the rest of us in some respects, of having different competency levels, different motivators, different desires. Many of them are drawn to positions of power. Many of them are able to keep their conditions under wraps or in check or undercover until they achieve a certain position of prominence in life. And then once they have it, they're able to cover it up enough to keep it, but also do harm to others. And it's not, a lot of people picture like a movie or something where it's a serial killer or something of that nature. That's a very rare and extreme case that something like that would happen. The majority of it is more emotional manipulation, mental manipulation, that sort of a thing, getting people to bend to their will, to do their bidding, to help further their own goals, whether that be, climbing a corporate ladder, climbing an organizational ladder, even in something as small as a family unit, controlling what goes on within the family. And oftentimes, they'll find people that, or if somebody challenges them, then, through that challenging, you'll become their target. They have this ability to mimic our emotions and our reactions, and a lot of times they'll preemptively accuse somebody of what they're doing to shift the eyes and the attention off of them and their behaviors and onto the person who may challenge them or for one reason or another has become their target. So then if you go to say it back, you get stuck into this, I know you are, but what am I routine, and it kind of just goes nowhere.
Okay, so I think it's pretty easy for people to imagine how they would make, if not good leaders, at least people who will step up and take power, take control, and that, they may be deliberately sought after to run government programs. If the government programs are involved in controlling people and controlling their lives, they would be highly sought after, even by corporations and such, wouldn't they?
Sure, and there is one video that I've watched. I've watched a lot of videos on psychopathy, sociopathy. These are not the clinical terms, but if you're going to be, doing some research, these terms will help you find videos and reference material. And I forget who it was in one of the videos, but at the end of the video, he says, if you find somebody who's of good conscience and wants to be a good person, they won't be good in business because they don't have what it takes.
Right. They don't want to rip people off. They don't want to take. I mean, I just had AMCO literally steal the starter out of my vehicle. A psychopath or somebody who's morally sound and doesn't want to, harm somebody else wouldn't have stole the starter out of my truck. I mean, that's kind of what you're getting at, right?
Sure. That's kind of a petty theft, but it combined with other indicators, yes, that could be an indicator that they have it. But there's always, a list of things that somebody could have that might make them do such a thing, or it could, you never really know. Also, if the place doesn't have security overnight, it could be, I've heard several stories of thieves that go to shops, and it happened to me once where I had a truck parked and people siphoned the gas out. They would steal tools out of the truck and things like that. One time I had a car battery cut out of a car that I had parked in the same yard. It happens, unfortunately.
Now, these people who have this psychopathy, do they tend to want to act out their, I don't know what you call it, a mental disease alone, or they tend to band together in order to, monopolize and really, be a force? What are your thoughts on that?
They do have, many of them have an uncanny ability to be able to sense each other. It's almost like an extrasensory perception that they're able to identify each other, and in many cases they will seek to work with each other. That's a big part of what Ponerology is, and how a macro-social or even sometimes a micro-social Ponerology will develop. Is these people working together to achieve their goals.
Okay, and I know this would be, just a guesstimate, but what would you say of our politicians in Washington, D.C.? I mean, do you think there's any significant percentage? What are your thoughts on like a percentage of them that might be just psychopathic?
I definitely think there's a significant percentage there. Just by sheer numbers alone in our population, there's some doctors out there that claim it's as low as 2%, and then there's others that claim it's as high as 6%. Dr. Lobachevsky, who wrote Political Ponerology, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name, but he says it's about 6%, but that also cultural factors can play in. If you have a culture that's accepting of this type of behavior over a number of years, that number can increase drastically. Looking at what happened, in Nazi Germany, this type of behavior, was tolerated, was promoted, and resistance to it was punished. So in their society, the number went up quite a bit. So I would venture a guess that in our government in Washington, D.C., I would say that the numbers would have to at least be in low double digits, somewhere around 10 to 15% would be probably my conservative guess.
Okay. Now I'm going to take us in a little bit of a different direction. Myself, I'm a Christian, and, my pastor says that man is born in sin. And what you're alluding to is that if a society allows it, that a greater percentage of people will be psychopathic by nature. So are you basically saying that a lot of people are psychopathic, but they're somehow trained out of that, or that's somehow suppressed by religion or by government or by good parenting? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, behavior becomes engineered one way or the other. There's a degree of the individual perseverance. You can't completely control somebody, but there's also a degree of shaping through society. That's not always necessarily a bad thing, and I guess it depends to what degree is it intentional manipulation, and to what degree is it just having a certain standard. I think that a lot of times with libertarianism, with people that are anarcho-capitalists, they get lost in an ideology of just allowing things to happen. And if you've ever seen the Boondock Saints movie, which I'm a very big fan of, there's a scene where they discuss how a woman was stabbed to death and nobody said anything and nobody would come to her aid, and it was in broad daylight, and her assailants just walked away and got away with it. There's something wrong with that. We need to have some standards to prevent these types of behaviors from running rampant. And whether I would like to see those behaviors taken care of more by us, by the people. But we have the rule of law, we have the Constitution to protect individual rights and to protect life.
Okay. And since you bring up the Boondock Saints, that is a great couple movies there. I mean, obviously, we don't want people to do what they did in that movie, because isn't that in and of itself? And this is what I was getting at when I said, can psychopathy be used for good? Because to do what they did, you almost had to be a psychopath, even though they were enacting out vengeance upon bad people. I mean, you don't want to do that, or I mean, that's not. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a very interesting question there. At what point is something like that ever permissible? Is it something like that ever needed? I mean, if you're out with your family and then somebody goes to perpetrate violence on you and your family, and you respond meeting violence with violence, does that necessarily mean that you're responding with psychopathy? I think to a degree, in a primal state, maybe if you completely lose self-control over the degree you respond with. If you say responded with deadly force once you had already subdued the attacker and you didn't need to, I think you might be crossing that line into it at that point. So I think it has to do with degrees. At what degree do you cross the line into psychopathy, and to what degree are you maybe just unlocking something that is bordering on that?
Right. And, at the same time, if we play this game where, I mean, I've been told by the police, if somebody pulls a knife on you, you're not allowed to pull a gun on them. You can only pull a knife. I mean, they literally said this to me. I mean, we can't play this game where we can only defend ourselves with what we're being attacked by, or we can only defend ourselves or humanity as a whole from the very person who's attacking us when they attack us. I mean, if we do that, we're perpetually stuck in this trap of not being able to defend ourselves at all, because we're counting on the government that's psychopathic to defend us from the government that's psychopathic.
Right. And then who's this? Okay, you could say that, the gun is overboard on the knife, but what if somebody that does, landscaping and tree service, and you have a chainsaw? Is the chainsaw trumping the knife? Or what if you have a claw hammer and you're a carpenter or something? Is the claw hammer trumping the knife, or is that acceptable? It just seems to, at a certain point, it's getting to be ridiculous. It couldn't even. You don't have to use the gun to pull the gun out. I mean, you should be prepared to use it if you're going to pull it out. But then, there's also, I don't know how many states this technically holds legal water with, but I saw a video from a gun advocacy group that they suggest that if you have to draw your weapon, the proper legal warning that would stand up in a lot of states would be, I have a gun, do not proceed, your life is worth more. And then once you verbalize that, then you're to a degree covered legally, depending on the state you're in.
So you say that before you draw the gun, you're saying?
I think the process is you draw the gun, but then you would say that before you would fire the gun.
Okay. And that was Texas?
I don't know the exact state. I don't know how many states it applies in. I wish I would remember the gun advocacy group that I saw this from, but I clearly remember seeing it, and I remember being pretty interested in that, because when you think about it, 100 years ago we would have never had this conversation over drawing a weapon, but now in this day and age, that's the proper procedure is to say that. So it's part of gun training, I guess. If you really wanted to get that into it, learn how to say that phrase, clearly, loudly, and then without freezing up if you have about to say it.
Right. And, I would just add as a last word on that topic, if it ever comes down to it and you have to open fire on somebody, remember to get in a police report. And I quote, I was in fear for my life, because that's exactly what the police say when they shoot everyone. Well, Anthony, thanks for talking with us tonight. Do you want to get in a word or two about this dispute you've been having over this flag before we close for the night?
Sure. There's a flag in my hometown court, the UN flag. When I first discovered it, it was standing taller and in larger dimensions than the U.S. flag. I made a video about it. InfoWars covered it. I had an article with it as well. And then a lot of people called in